Today, we'll be rating every biome in Subnautica using the fish scale. This contains the fanciness of an area, the inhabitants, space available, and the harvestables. These four key concepts help to determine how easy it will be to make a nice and livable sea base. On screen now is a detailed explanation of how I came up with these numbers. Let's get started. The blood kelp zone is located in the far northwest corner of the map, just between the mountains and the dunes. This area is unique, with areas that are visually appealing, but it's overshadowed by how dark it is. It weighs in at a 4 in fanciness. While looking at that beautiful scenery, you'll see warpers, blood crawlers, ampeels, crab squids, and a ghost leviathan. This area gets a 3 in inhabitants. Most of this biome is filled with underwater cliffs with minimal flat areas for a near seafloor build, but there is a lot of overhead space that does help secure it a 6. Weighing in all of the resources available, it receives a 5 in harvestables. It does lack titanium here, which is a heavy weighing factor in these ratings since it's used in just about every piece of a base. This leaves the blood kelp zone with a weight of 4.5 on the fish scale. You can find the bulb zones located in the northeast corner of the map, pretty close to the Reaper Leviathan off the front of the Aurora. During the day, this area looks pretty nice, but at night, I'd say this biome looks great. It gets a 6 in fanciness from those cool lit up bulbs. It would get higher, but those bulbs are really all that add any appeal. It's tough to find a safe place to build in this zone. With the roaming ampeels, you're fairly certain to get attacked outside of your base. But there are a wide variety of good fish here that'll help you stay full. In certain areas, you will encounter a Reaper Leviathan and some warpers. Those are no fun. So the bulb zone gets a 4 in inhabitants. This biome gets a 7 in space because there are loads of space to build above you and a decent amount of flat space to choose from if you want a spot to build on the seafloor. Finding resources isn't too bad here. You can find ruby alongside shale and sandstone outcrops, plus lithium and gold deposits. Alongside all that, you can find a few thermal vents, so it gets a 6.8 in harvestables, which means the bulb zone gets a 6 overall. Cragfield can be found south of the Aurora's crash zone, east of the Grand Reef. It doesn't have the most appealing look, but it is unique. With those large rock formations jutting out of the ground, this area gets a 5 in fanciness. Don't let its looks fool you though. It's not the most visually welcoming area, but the Cragfield is home to many friendly fish that are good for friend and food, and some unfriendly bone sharks, but that's it. It has an 8.2 for inhabitants. This is a case where building up and around is easy, but having a nice place close to the seafloor is not at all. It gets a 7 in space. You'll find diamond, gold, lithium, and all the basics here. It gets a 7 in harvestables, which leaves the Cragfield with a 6.8 overall. I'd say it's time to change that G to a P in crag, but it's really not that bad compared to some of the ones coming up. Crash Zone is pretty hard to miss. Not only is it where the Aurora is, but it's also the largest biome. The murkiness of the surrounding waters make it hard to see much of anything, which helps give this area a 3 in fanciness. Thanks to the 9 patrolling Reapers in just about every direction, this area earns a 3 in inhabitants. Match that with how hard it is to see, a pretty bad time. You can find a bit of flat space in some areas here, granted you can see well enough to find them. There is even a small patch of land on the east side of the Aurora. All those factors combined, it gets about a 6 in space. You'll see a variety of resources here, including the very useful titanium, but relative to the risk, there aren't many harvestables here that are worth it, so it got a 4.7 in that category, and a 4.2 overall. I'd never build here, but maybe that's just because I'm the weakest link. Crater Edge is located all the way around the map, and it's a record breaker. It gets zeros all the way around because, nah. Really, it could get a 5 in space, so we could say it's a 1.3, but once again, nah. Here is a big fat 0 for the place that always scares me when I accidentally swim out and here I'm
entering ecological dead zone.
The dunes are up next. These dunes take up a large portion of the northwest area of the map. It is fairly nice here and has this large sinkhole, but overall it's pretty plain and kinda dark, even with very clear water. So it gets a 4 in fanciness. You can find rock grub here, but other than that, between the Reaper Leviathan, Warpers, and Sand Sharks, this area earns a 4.5 in inhabitants. The dunes being plain works in their favor some because they have some very open areas. Unfortunately, they're not flat, but there are some nice flat areas. This biome gets a 7.5 in space. In the dunes, there are a wide variety of large deposits and many other resources that will help you build your base. With all of the resources around, a scanner room will be your best friend here. It gets a 7 in Harvestables. The dunes get 5.8 overall if they were only more friendly looking and friendly feeling. Welcome to Floating Island. The underside of this island's being held up by ancient floaters, and the land above makes this area beautiful. It gets a 7 in Fanciness. There are not many inhabitants here. Other than the very cool ancient floaters and the occasional sky ray, the only things left are shoals of fish and cave crawlers, so it gets a 5 in inhabitants. I wish there was more space to build your own base here, but aside from some tiny bits, this island is pretty packed. Underwater there is plenty of space, but if you wanted to build on any sort of ground, it's lacking. It gets a 7 in space. There are a lot of good resources you can find here, like the marble melon plants, bulbo trees, and a lot of other resources. But you won't find any of the basic materials required for building here. It's a 4 in Harvestables, which means this floating island will float its way up to a 5.8 overall. You might know the Grand Reef from its very large balls. The Grand Reef is dark, but the light from those anchor pods and the view of the jagged sparse reef off to the side, it earns a 7 in Fanciness. The inhabitants here involve bone sharks, crab squids, ghost leviathans, and warpers. They're all around, so it gets a 4. This is another area where there's a large amount of space to work with, but finding lots of flat areas so your house can look like SpongeBob's neighborhood is limited. This gives it a 6.5 in space. There are a good amount of resources in the Grand Reef, with the caves being plentiful in diamond, ruby, lithium, and uraninite, and even some thermal vents. So the Grand Reef gets a 7.5 in Harvestables, but only a 6.3 overall. Grassy plateaus are where I normally find myself building bases. They can be found in a few different directions, with 4 grassy plateau biomes all having areas that border the safe shallows. The plateaus get a 7 in Fanciness. There's not too much going on here, but there's also not too little. The colors are nice and the reefback leviathans float like blimps in the sky. Other than the sand sharks and those little needle shooting guys, you won't find any enemies here. But you will find plenty of friends, giving the plateaus an 8 in inhabitants. You can build pretty much anywhere in the grassy plateaus. It's slightly limited in depth. The only obstacles around are the plateaus themselves, so this biome gets an 8 in space. You can find basic resources here, from copper and acid mushrooms to lithium, titanium, lead, and even more. It gets a 7.2 in Harvestables, which means the grassy plateaus get a 7.6 overall. So far, these have been mostly in alphabetical order, but I'm gonna skip past the inactive lava zones for now because I want to just do one big scary trip instead of 2. Jelly Shroom Cave is a very unique looking biome. With the large illuminated jelly shrooms, I'd say it's worth it to take the risk building around those crab snakes. It ties for second place as the nicest biome with a 9 in Fanciness. Between the crab snakes and biters, it's not the most risky biome by far, but the limited amount of other fauna for food or water leave it with a 6 in inhabitants. There's a really average amount of area to build with down here. There are a few bits of it that are pretty flat, but not much space in general, so it really averages out at about a 5. There are diamonds here and a small amount of large resource deposits including gold and magnetite. You can also find thermal vents down here. While some of those things are very good, it's really limited. So it gets a 5 in Harvestables, and they earn a 6.5 overall. Kelp Forest is a little murky, but it is fairly nice looking, which helps it land at a 6 in Fanciness. There are stalkers and bleeders here, but those are pretty easy to get to leave you alone, and the rest of the area has a lot of food and water, which gives this area a 6 in inhabitants. You can clear out those creep vines and get them out of the way of your base, but even then, this area is far from flat and not very deep in many areas, so it gets a 4 in space. You can find metal salvage here, which gives you 4 titanium each, and a few other useful resources that can help you build your base, so it's about a 6 in Harvestables, and a 5.5 overall. I can't avoid it much longer. Let's go down to the underworld for a little bit. For the space rating down here, the areas will get a 1 through 5 for how open it is, and a 1 through 5 for how flat it is. Inactive lava chamber is an interesting biome. It gets a 6 in fanciness because in some ways it is visually appealing, but it also has a haunting look that really makes you concerned for what's lurking in the darkness. Spoiler alert, it's not good. It does have this cool lava castle though, so that's nice. With everything living in this biome not wanting you to be there, it gets a 1.4 in inhabitants. The space here is decent, but many of the upper areas are not recommended to build in. Although the fish don't attack your bases, the sea dragon doesn't care and can cause damage whether intentional or not. The space here is a 4 due to how low you'd need to build and how narrow these lower areas are. One upside here is that it gets a 7.2 in Harvestables. Though the titanium is only obtained through the large deposits, most endgame materials can be found here, so even just being close to this biome can get you a decent bit of resources. The inactive lava chamber achieves a 4.7 overall. Inactive lava zone corridor is the one that connects to the tree cove. It looks about the same as the lava chamber, but it's significantly smaller and more enclosed, leaving it with a 7 in fanciness and a 3 in space. You'll find magma rangs and red eyes here, which leaves you without easy access to water. It gets a 4 in inhabitants. There is a large titanium deposit down here, but no quartz for your windows. Overall, it's not at all littered with resources and gets a 5 in Harvestables, and a 4.8 overall. Lava Lakes is about as low as you can go, literally. It gets a 7 in fanciness because, to give credit where credit is due, it's beautiful here. Hold your seahorses though, it gets a 1.4 in inhabitants, because 2 simple words. Sea dragon, or is that one word? With limited build space outside the lava, especially with the sea dragon looming overhead, it gets a total of a 4 in space. Although you'll find kyanite and crystalline sulfite here, that's all it has, which isn't very useful in base building, giving it a 1.5 in Harvestables. Though we could make that a little bit higher due to the endless supply of thermal energy down here since the water's so hot. So let's give it a 2. This leaves these lakes of lava with a 3.6 overall. It should probably be avoided. Lava Pit is unique looking, even if it looks like a, let's just say starfish. It's unique, but there isn't much to it, so it gets a 5 in fanciness. There are no useful inhabitants here, and since I've tried balancing these between 5 points good and 5 points bad, with there being pretty much nothing here, I think a 5 will be fair. It gets a 6 in space since it's pretty wide and tall, but being a gateway to the underworld, I personally wouldn't build here. Mainly because I'd crash my Cyclops into any sort of a base, even if it was a small hut in the corner. It does have some Harvestables, but only enough for a 2.6. It has a limited amount of titanium, gold, and uraninite, and some other small resources. The titanium usually helps more, but it is really limited here, and it's just not enough. This hole receives a 4.7. Up next are the 5 Lost River areas. The Bone Field is where you can find that gargantuan skull. Due to this and the overall charm of the Lost River itself, it's earned itself a 9 in fanciness. There's juvenile ghost leviathans directly on the Ghost Canyon side by the skull, and a small amount of edible fish. So it gets a 4.3 in inhabitants. You may turn into bones here though. This area is fairly open outside of the large skeleton in the middle, but it lacks in fields, so it's a 5 in space. There are a few thermal vents here, alongside large resource deposits like titanium that are mostly found underneath the brine. And that is enough for a 6.8 in Harvestables and weighs in these bones at a 6.3 overall. The Lost River corridor connects the bone fields to the Blood Kelp Trench. Between the brine falls and illuminated flora, combined with the aesthetic of every Lost River area, it gets an 8 in fanciness. This area has a 4 in inhabitants. It's not too dangerous outside the crab squids, but it doesn't have anything except for spinefish to eat. It is fairly open, but finding a flat spot here is also impossible. It has a 4 in space. It gets a 5 in Harvestables thanks to the large amount of titanium deposits and a good supply of other resources like quartz, diamond, copper, and more. This area of the Lost River receives a 5.3 overall. Lost River Ghost Canyon is to the north of the bone fields, just past the Ghost Leviathan. It loops around and connects to the Blood Kelp Trench or over to the Sparse Reef. It gets a 6 in fanciness. It has many brine waterfalls and is home to the laboratory cache, but other than that, it's kinda plain here. It gets a 7 for inhabitants because outside of the crab squid, there are no dangers here. And everything else around here is a good source of food, including our good friend Reginald. So it gets a 7 in inhabitants. With the limited space in this passage, there's not much space to build, especially if you want to leave room for your vehicles to get through. It gets a 4 in this category. Harvestables are fairly limited, but it does provide a few resources like quartz and titanium, as well as copper ore and nickel, which helps it get a 6 in Harvestables. The Ghost Canyon gets a total weight of 5.8 on the fish scale. Some of the upcoming areas outperform these past few by far. Lost River Ghost Forest is located between the junction and the entrance from the Blood Kelp Zone. It gets an 8 in fanciness. What makes it so much more unique than the others is the large one-of-a-kind forest entangling the entire area. Unfortunately, you will find another juvenile ghost leviathan here, as well as many blood crawlers and river prowlers. There's still a good bit of food available with our friend Reginald, and the visual appeal from the ghost rays, so it ends up with a 5.9. Unfortunately, those cool trees around here don't come without a cost. It gets a 4 in space. This area contains multiple large deposits, including titanium for those basic base pieces. It gets a 7 in Harvestables, and a 6.7 overall. Lost River Junction gets another 8 in fanciness. Let's be honest, I just love these brine waterfalls, and I think this place looks great, but not as good as one of the next areas. I bet you know what it is, but let's wait till we get there. Don't spoil the surprise. The warpers and the prowlers in the Lost River Junction don't help, but with the visually appealing fish, as well as our friend Reginald, what is he doing down here? It gets a 6.7 in inhabitants. The buildable area around here is more than the Ghost Forest, but isn't as open or as flat as some of the others. This area gets a 6 in space. You can find titanium and many large deposits down here like quartz, titanium, silver, and much more. There are many thermal vents down here as well, helping it get a 7.6 in Harvestables and weighing it in at a 7.1 overall. The Lost River Mountains corridor connects the Lost River to the mountains. It also has a deep pit that drops down into the lava zone. This area is rated at a 7 in fanciness because, of course, those brine waterfalls and the nice glowing plants, alongside what look like star-like dots along the walls and ceiling. It gets a 5 in inhabitants, mainly thanks to our good friend Reginald, some spinefish, and ghost rays. But other than that, everything else down here doesn't like you. Area here is fairly limited, but it still gets about a 5 in space. Titanium deposits, quartz, gold, diamond, and thermal vents can be found in this area, which help it get a 6 in Harvestables and a 5.8 overall. Lost River Tree Cove can be found to the west of the junction and serves as a great pit stop for journeys to the inactive lava zone. As you may have guessed, a 10 in fanciness, because I mean, have you seen this place? Just look at it. Who cares if those eggs are ghost leviathan babies? It gets a 9 in inhabitants because everything else around here is nice and even has some bladderfish for your emergency water replenishment. There is plenty of open space to build down here, alongside a lot of flat spots, so it gets a 7 in space. The Tree Cove has quartz, large titanium deposits, and more, but in my experience, finding many of these isn't very common, and you'll spend a lot of your time shopping around in the rest of the river. It gets a 6.5 in Harvestables, with the boost it gets from the thermal vents. This gives the Tree Cove an 8.1 overall. Alright, I'm getting scared down here and we wrapped it all up, so let's move back surface side. Mountain Island gets a 7 in Fanciness. It is very visually appealing here. With its unique caves and good contrast with the floating island, it's just different. It's not entirely safe here. You've got the cave crawlers, but we do have those beautiful sky rays again, so it gets a 5 in Inhabitants. There is more flat area to build on around here compared to the floating island, but still not much relative to the overall biome, so it gets a 5 in Space. Resources? Good luck. This has one of the lowest ratings with a 2.2 in Harvestables. It has some good resources for progression, but it lacks the basic resources required to build a base. This island gets a 5.1 overall. The mountains biome gets a 5 in Fanciness. They are unique in the way that it is mountainous, but other than that, it's pretty plain, outside of the bordering alien structure that loves rocket ships. It's not necessarily bad looking, it's just very vast and barren. For inhabitants, there are some good fish here, like peepers, boomerangs, and what is Reginald always doing in such dangerous areas? Doesn't he see that Reaper Leviathan and those warpers? The mountains get a 5 in Inhabitants. There is a lot of upward space to build here. It gets a 7 in Space. The Harvestables here are pretty weak. Outside of the thermal vents, there are only a few good resources. It's an area that doesn't have quartz or titanium. It gets a big ol' 4 in Harvestables and a 5.3 overall, making it fairly average. The mushroom forests get an 8 in Fanciness, easily earned through the vibrant, though somewhat cluttered visuals, but it is strikingly different than any other biomes in the game. You'll find bone sharks, ampeels, and mesmers. That's mesmerizing, sorry. This is offset a bit by the reefback leviathan some. It has a 6 in Inhabitants. Good luck building here, especially if you want to keep your base close to the ground. I think you can see why it gets a 6 in Space. The good news is, this is a nice biome to build by. You'll find a large variety of resources available to help you with your base, but it does lack quartz, so you get no glass. It gets a 6.3 in Harvestables and a 6.6 overall. Personally, I just build next door in the Grassy Plateaus. Safe shallows are where you spawn into the game. This area is very visually appealing. I think because the first time I played this game, I never left that area, but I knew I'd come back eventually. And that was the time I streamed this game and was told, I'll subscribe if you go behind the Aurora. It gets a 7 in Fanciness. This area has a 10 in Inhabitants. There's not much here that wants to hurt you, and there's a lot of food to where you could just survive forever here. As far as space goes here, as much as it's safe, it's also shallow. Ha! Since it's so shallow, it's hard to build a larger base underwater. It receives a 4 in Space. The starter area comes with starter resources, granting it a moderate 5.7 in Harvestables. Of course, it's got the titanium and quartz that you need, but you'll need to explore some more for other pieces. It's got a 7.7 overall. Sea Treader's Path is a nice looking area. It's not the most visually stunning, and it doesn't really have a notable element like the blood kelps or bulbs, but it's still visually pleasing in a way that it can get a 5 in Fanciness. Outside of the warpers and shuttle bugs, everything here is peaceful. Even our good friend Reginald is here. He's finally somewhere safe. You can find boomerangs here for water, so it gets a 7 in Inhabitants with everything else considered. You may want to avoid the Sea Treader's Path. There's potential for glitchy damage, as well as them endlessly walking into your base, and really you might mess up their migration patterns. And that's not cool. Although there are some large cliffs, there are also 2 very large flat buildable areas with an extremely high height, giving it a 7 in Space. One more 7 is earned here in Harvestables as lead, titanium, quartz, magnetite, and many other resources that can be helpful to you when building a base. Overall, it weighs in at a 6.8. Sparse Reef is a fairly nice area. It doesn't hold anything too unique outside of the spires though, but the water isn't too murky. It gets a 6 in Fanciness. Outside of the shuttlefish, you'll only find friendly fish here. Once again, including our good friend Reginald. I'm happy for him. He's somewhere safe, somewhere that gets an 8 in inhabitants. You'll find plenty of room to build here in the lower bits of the reef, which get it a 7 in space. With titanium, quartz, and more, it lands itself at a 6 in Harvestables, and a total of a 6.8 overall. Underwater islands are a very visually appealing biome. The floating islands have illuminated spots from the ancient floaters, and the islands themselves can make some nice silhouettes, so it gets a 9 in fanciness, although it is a little dark. You won't find any enemies here outside of the bone sharks, but you also won't find Reginald here. 0 in nah, I'm kidding. It's a 7 in inhabitants, thanks to the boomerangs, peepers, spadefish, and limited threat overall. There is a lot of headspace and buildable area here, and some buildable flat areas, which help it get a 7 in space. There are some good resources here, including limestone, sandstone, shale outcrops, and even some potential for thermal power, which helped it get a 6 in Harvestables, and a 7.3 overall. Here are all of the rankings. I hope you enjoyed this video, and that it helps you find a spot to build your dream base in this vast underwater world. If you'd like to see more like this, of course like and subscribe, and drop a game below in the comments if you'd like all of its areas rated. Here are all of the channel members on the screen. If you're thinking about making videos, shorts, or live streaming, or whatever it is you want to do, be like Nike and just do it.